Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and I need to pull up my slides so that we can get started. So today we're going to be talking about perfectionism, and I've been making it a mission of mine to go around to different organizations to spread the word and the message about perfectionism because I think it's misunderstood. A lot of people think it's helpful when in reality, I think it mostly gets in the way. And so I would like to give you a little bit of my perspective on this and hopefully will shift your thinking around that potential idea and then to provide you with some resources. There will be an opportunity to get some resources for free. As towards the end of the presentation, I'm going to be hopefully getting some feedback from all of you. I'm always trying to shape this presentation and get feedback. And as a thank you, you can get these slides automatically if you enter your email, as well as a guide on burnout to help you focus on preventing burnout, wherever that may be. It's focused on work, but we all know you can get burnt out at home and in family members and being a family member or working as a caregiver with a sick parent. There's burnout everywhere. So the guide is free for you as a thank you for filling out that feedback form, which I'll provide you with a link to that in just a moment. In the meantime, I'd like to get started and talk about the dangers of perfectionism. And to do that, I'd like you to meet Sam. This is Sam, quite proud. He's a team director, serves clients. He has a lot of responsibilities. He's a lot on his plate, lots to juggle. And he is ripe for getting burnt out and suffering from perfectionism. And so today we're going to talk about what that might look like. Sam wants to be extremely productive and efficient. He's looking to be a star. And the problem is that Sam has perfectionism and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means, but that perfectionism greatly gets in the way of all those things that he wants to be. He wants, the creativity, innovation, the efficiency and productivity. The perfectionism is the greatest villain to that. But what do I mean when I talk about perfectionism? Well, perfectionism is multifaceted, and I'm going to break down some of the features that I think a lot of people don't recognize in perfectionism. I think the two biggest ingredients, one of them is excessive expectations, having goals that are frankly beyond what others would consider reasonable. And the other ingredient, and this one's core to me as a psychologist, is inflexible thinking. So what happens is that people have these really lofty goals that other people might find infeasible, and then they have this inability to see another way. They have a very narrow way of approaching it, and they have a hard time pivoting when things don't work out the way that they want. So they might essentially keep hitting their head against the wall because that rigidity is making it hard for them to try a different strategy and recognize that their expectation is frankly not reasonable. The other features are fear of failure and an intolerance of mistakes. I think these things go together. Fear of failure is at the core of perfectionism, this idea that you could make a massive error and perhaps cost your company millions or be judged poorly by the person you just went on a date with, or you become a terrible parent. You're worried about this, and this drives a lot of your decision making. And you really do not do well when you found out you've made a mistake. Perhaps you even deny it or fight against that concept, or you just are feeling devastated because of making a mistake. And in a lot of ways, perfectionism boils down to this misperception of control. People with perfectionism, in fact, I would say anxiety in general, which is common for perfectionists, tend to really think that they don't have a certain amount of control in situations. And frankly, they're right. But what they do is they double down to try to gain control. And they'll do all sorts of things to try to exercise control. But the problem is, in a lot of those situations, there's not a whole lot of control that can be had. So people end up engaging in a ton of behaviors, and it's mostly an illusion that they have any control in the situation. And we're going to talk about what's called safety behaviors in a moment, but safety behaviors are an excellent example. These are things like excessive checking and fixing. going over the same email 30 times to make sure that you worded things correctly. My favorite, of course, is rereading the email after you sent it, as if you could magically do something about that, right? There are all sorts of things that people do that have this illusion of control, and it gets people quite stuck. Another common feature of perfectionism is this little thing called imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of people can resonate with. And it's this idea that people feel like they're a fraud and they're going to be caught or found out. And perfectionism correlates strongly with this. And, you know, it's, I always tell people that I think a little bit of imposter syndrome is healthy. I am quite skeptical or frankly concerned about people that have zero imposter syndrome. But when it becomes severe, it can become very debilitating and can stop people from advancing in important things in their life. A core problem for perfectionism is that they have a difficult time with prioritizing. I have something I call the emphasis framework. Emphasis A, B, and C. Emphasis A is for tasks that are super critical to you. You want to give it 110%, everything you got. Maybe it's running the Rotary in Miami and you want to give it everything, right, Diane? Or maybe it's maybe it's your wedding day and you want to put everything you got into that. Or it's a pitch deck for a venture capitalist that you're trying to get money from. These are really important tasks for you based on your values. And so you give it everything you got. Emphasis B is the get it done. Just get it done. Doesn't need to be perfect, doesn't need to be garbage, just needs to get done. These things are reserved for most things in life. You know, getting certain forms done for your child's school to let them go on the field trip, or getting your taxes done. Not a whole lot of people put a ton of energy into that. Or maybe it's, you know, making that phone call to that person you're trying to keep up with, but it's not a super critical relationship. These emphasis B tasks are designated as such because they're not as important in your value system, but they still need to get done. Emphasis C is the don't do it at all strategy. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. All three of these, I'm agnostic to judging them in a good or bad way. It really depends on the context. Emphasis C is a really strategic approach sometimes. I never answer the customer service satisfaction survey at the end of my Verizon call. Never. And sorry if any of you work for Verizon, but that's just not where I want to spend my time and effort. And so instead, I will hang up in a strategic way because I've selected to do that based on my value system. That's not where I want to put my effort. Now, the problem with perfectionism is that people try to emphasis A everything or way too many things. And the problem is that you can't do that. There's just not enough resource, time in the day to do that. And so what happens is that tasks get pushed off, procrastination or never done, and they get pushed off to an emphasis C, but not because of your values, but because of perfectionism. So you're not strategically choosing emphasis C. Perfectionism is dictating that to you. So things that get pushed off are not necessarily things that ought to be pushed off. They're not being pushed off because of your values. Another common feature is that individuals confuse principles and rules. And this is a real problem. And I like to give a really silly example of this because I think it illustrates. Imagine you're at the community pool. I'm sure there's plenty of those in Miami. And you go and you see a drowning child. And nobody else notices, including the lifeguard. And then the lifeguard notices you running towards the lifeguard, towards the drowning child. And then the lifeguard screams and blows a whistle and says, please stop running near the pool. Even though the lifeguard now sees the drowning child, that is what they've chosen to do because there's a clear rule posted on the board that says no running near the pool. I know it's really silly. Nobody would do that. But interestingly, I see this in organizations and agencies all the time. People get hyper-focused on rules, even though they're not really appreciating or understanding the underlying principles underneath those rules. In this case, the principle or the values underlying that rule of no running near the pool is public safety. Yet this poor kid is drowning. All right, that would be the ultimate public safety violation. And so this individual is so rigid about applying rules that he's undermining the core principle. And I see this as a silly example, but one that I think helps people understand where I'm coming from. Another common feature of perfectionism is this funny thing I say that we call in the field, not just right feelings, NJRFs. I think we've all experienced this. This is where you're doing something until it just feels just right. Maybe you fix the margins on your paper until it feels just right, or you stop cleaning when it feels like it's just done or just right. This is a gut feeling or an emotional reaction. And the problem is with perfectionism, it represents the threshold that you're waiting for to move forward and to be done with something. And the problem is often that threshold is never met. So people will continue to work on things because you're not quite getting to that feeling, and that gets you stuck and it gets you paralyzed. And perhaps one of the most destructive parts of perfectionism is when it's projected outward. So perfectionism has three forces. One of them is self-directed or self-oriented. This is where you derive in your own mind really rigid and perfectionistic standards for yourself. It's not coming from anyone else. That's self-oriented perfectionism. Then there's a type where you have derived really rigid standards and perfectionistic tendencies, and you project them onto other people. And the third one is socially prescribed perfectionism. This is where we have messaging and forces from the world around us telling us that we have to meet these perfectionistic standards. These are things like magazine covers, Vogue covers, and Maxim covers, and beautiful celebrities, and all of these things. These are projecting onto us as in a socially prescribed way. Now, to go back to the other oriented version of this, it becomes really toxic for the people around us when it takes a moral format. When people walk around policing others and projecting moral, rigid, and perfectionistic standards on the people around them. And we see this in workplaces and in other organizations. And it's essentially looks like somebody walking around and being sanctimonious or self-righteous. And it really drives people away and costs a ton of social capital and can really undermine a healthy social dynamic. And as I alluded to earlier, there's something called safety behaviors. Safety behaviors are a reaction to perfectionistic anxiety. These are all the things we do to give us some temporary relief when we're feeling like something needs to be perfect and is making us anxious. And so what it does is it grows over time because they become temporary relief mechanisms. And so examples of this are things that you'll probably recognize. Reassurance seeking, excessively so. Is this okay? How does this look? Did I do this right? Fixing and checking, right? Does this look like just looking at something over and over again or making something fixed? You can fix something until it's actually even worse than it was before. That's something that I've experienced in my own life. I remember when I was a kid, I was drawing Spider-Man, trying to get the webbing on his costume just right. I don't know if you can picture Spider-Man right now, but he has this interesting geometry on his costume, and I couldn't get it quite right. There's that not just right feeling. And I kept erasing it over and over and over again until I ultimately destroyed my picture. Spider-Man looked like he had spaghetti arms by the time I was done. And that's an example of the irony of perfectionism. You're trying to perfect something so much that you've actually made it much worse and made it super imperfect. Other examples of this are worrying and problem solving and researching on the internet, over analyzing, and a lot of avoidance behavior. Procrastination is a super common um, result of perfectionism. If you can't get something perfect or you anticipate that you can't, you just don't do it. You just push it off or you don't ever do it. So what do I mean when I say that this is a huge problem? Well, it has problems at both the individual and organizational level. I'm going to talk a little bit about the individual level and then just quickly show you the organizational level because I think the individual level is the most important for this particular discussion today. Before, though, I start ragging on people with perfectionism. No, by the way, I am a recovering perfectionist. So I just want to point that out. There was a personal journey and a professional journey that coalesced into the book that I put out about a year ago or 8, 9 months ago. And this journey I've been on is both personal and professional. And so I want to make sure that I point out some of the positives that correlate with perfectionism because it's not that I want to vilify perfectionists or for there to be a witch hunt. That's not my goal. My goal is for us to mitigate the concerns and damages that come from perfectionism so that we can leverage some of the positive qualities. And boy, there are quite a bit of them listed here. Perfectionists will be some of your most loyal individuals in your teams and your groups. They tend to be the most honest. Some of that moralism I was talking about earlier, one of the side effects of that is that people tend to be pretty honest. So if you're looking for an honest response, I go to my local perfectionist. They tend to be extremely detailed oriented. Sometimes at the expense of the big picture, but look, we all need these people in our lives, detailed oriented individuals on teams. And they are, if I need something, if I need something detailed, like investigated in a detailed way, I will go to my local perfectionist. They tend to be the most hardworking. They've been doubling down on everything for their entire life. They'll do 200% on a task. They are by far the most hardworking people in the room. Now, not terribly efficient, but extremely hardworking. And the number one ingredient in the research literature that's correlated with perfectionism is conscientiousness. And frankly, if there's anybody I would want to be hanging out with or to have on my teams or in my family, it's somebody who's conscientious. That being said, there are some major downsides to perfectionism, and I've broken it down into 3 different areas: well-being, work, and social. At work, and this is work broadly speaking, it's school, it could be work, volunteer work, it can be career work. There's less innovation and creativity. People with that rigidity and narrow minds, when they approach a task and that detailed orientedness, have a hard time seeing a big picture and pivoting to get creative results. The procrastination often leads to late or no work completion. And then they get stuck in something called process paralysis, where they're trying to create the perfect approach to doing something. Perfect strategy, perfect order of operations. And then they end up getting so stuck that they never even get started. Common examples of this are creating excessive to-do lists and to-do lists about to-do lists, right? These are things that often can be useful in moderation, but with perfectionism can turn into its own safety behavior and can get people stuck. Slowed work and missing the big picture. So it's very difficult sometimes for people to remember the principle or value or the mission of something because they're so stuck in the weeds on a particular rule or behavior. Their individual well-being is suffering. Right? There's lots of anxiety. In fact, anxiety is the hallmark feature of perfectionism. It's a perfectionistic issue. Burnout and depression. This is why I'm offering a burnout guide as part of my seeking your feedback, is because burnout is an extremely, extremely common outcome for people with perfectionism, and burnout and depression go hand in hand. So lots of depression as well. Imposter syndrome, which I talked about earlier, and distraction, lots of distraction, people losing sight of what needs the most focus. And social. As we were indicating earlier, individuals that get sucked in to other oriented perfectionism and start policing others, they tend to be disruptive, disliked, and resented. But also, even people that are seeking reassurance or checking and fixing or not getting things done on time, they could cause a lot of problems as well. They tend to become needy and disliked and unreliable. I'm going to take a minute to show you some organizational level impacts. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but as you can see here, it's a tremendous impact on organizations, costing a toll on the bottom line and also creating tons of job dissatisfaction in the work culture. And here's another set of negatives. So what's the big idea that I'm trying to share and spread? Well, it really comes down to control. I think a lot of people think really improving performance and getting a grip is about taking more control. But in reality, it's about taking less. In the end, the truth is we really can't let control us. And I think that's what's happening with perfectionism. We're trying to exercise control, and in the process, we're losing it. And ultimately, the message that I want to send is sometimes the best use of our control is actually to give it up. And that's a very hard thing to do. And so I have put together a pyramid scheme. Well, that didn't sound right. A pyramid that suggests how to do that. I'm not going to go into extensive detail because that would be its own presentation. But as you can see here, it really focuses on 4 key principles: purpose, which is a values-based approach. Can you identify your values and pursue values-based action? What's important to you needs to be the compass that drives your behavior. An approach is the second part of the acronym. And this is really about facing discomfort. A lot of people engage in those safety behaviors because they're anxious and they don't want to feel that way. A lot of the individuals get stuck in a web of safety behaviors because they're constantly trying to avoid discomfort. And so a lot of what I do with organizations or people or patients in my office is work with them to approach discomfort on purpose, to learn and to grow in their flexibility. The third level is clarity. And this is really about providing a new perspective on thinking and emotions. A lot of individuals have a very challenged and disruptive relationship to their thinking and their thoughts. And it's my goal to help individuals learn some strategies for understanding what they can and cannot control when it comes to their thinking and what to do about it. And then the last part of the pyramid in the acronym is engagement. And this is about enhancing social capital by reducing enabling behavior for people around you that might have perfectionism and are engaging in safety behaviors. For example, you can do things that reduce reassurance seeking or checking procrastination. And so I have this model to help individuals to address perfectionism in themselves and in the culture and the people around them. So who is Sam C? I think I let the cat out of the bag earlier. Sam C is none other than myself, right? This is my middle name. Pleased to meet you. I've, as I indicated earlier, been struggling with my own perfectionism and learned quite a bit on that journey and have used that plus my professional experience to provide resources for people. About a year ago, my trainees at the University of Chicago, with who I supervise doing clinical work, when we've been working with patients with severe cases of perfectionism, they said, "Doc, you need to write this stuff down. This is really good stuff." And I said, maybe I should. And so that's what I did. Wrote a book and have been putting myself out there to spread the message. And it's been, a journey for me, but also writing the book has been a journey. I mean, it's interesting that you're writing a book and there's no greater exposure therapy exercise than to write a book if you're a perfectionist, especially a book about perfection. It really makes you face the very thing that you're writing about. So that is the big reveal. And to provide you with some extra contact information, if you want to reach out to me, if you have questions, I'm happy to hear from you. And if you're looking for more training on this, that's something we can chat about as well. And then I'm happy to open it to questions.